For this lecture, we will be learning about the arrival of the Spaniards. We will start with the age of exploration simply because through this, we will know why Spain colonized the Philippines. Then after, we will be discussing about the different expeditions, namely Magellan, Saavedra, Villalobos, and Legazpi, with much given emphasis with the Magellan and Legazpi expedition. Let's start! Good day. My name is Jaya Stocapio and I will be your lecturer for this topic. As I have mentioned a while ago, this topic is all about the arrival of the Spaniards. And we will not really proceed immediately to the expeditions of Magellan in 1521, but we will be discussing the age of exploration. According to different historians, during the Renaissance period, the most significant or the most striking thing that happened is, again, as I have mentioned, the age of exploration. So this is the time wherein the European countries have put their funds and their strength into funding different expeditions. Now, to know more about this, let's watch this short video. How was the video? Were you able to get all the information that was actually mentioned there? Or medyo nako-confuse ba kayo dahil sobrang daming treaties yung na-mention? But again, just to give emphasis, yung video na yon, it was just really talking about how Spain and Portugal have the world for their exploration. So let's just mention again the Treaty of Tordesillas that was signed in 1494. When this was signed, Spain owned half of the world, which is on the west, and Portugal on the east. So technically, ang Pilipinas, it belongs to Portugal for exploration. Okay, now the question is, why do they do it? Regardless of how expensive and regardless of how dangerous an expedition is, a lot of people are still very much willing to do it. And in fact, the king and the queens of Portugal and Spain are also very much willing to fund these expeditions. Their main motivation is what we call as the 3 Gs, which is the gospel, gold, and glory. So ano nga ba to? Unahin natin yung gospel. Gospel stands for religion. So this is their motivation to spread Christianity. And then after that, we have gold, which is the economic aspect of it. So basically trading. And then we have glory, which is the political aspect and also the prestige for the explorers. So again, those are the 3 Gs, which is the main motivation of the explorers in the 15th century. You have heard of him. You already know him. In fact, I think he was mentioned from your primary years and even in your high school years. Ferdinand Magallanes or Ferdinand Magellan. But you know, aside from the person who arrived here in the Philippines in 1521, maybe yung iba sa atin ang tingin natin is siya ang nag-establish ng colony sa Pilipinas or ng Spanish colony sa Philippines. But it's not really that story, or it did not happen that agad-agad. So Ferdinand Magellan was a Portuguese working for Spain. He was leading other expedition before he went to the Philippines in 1521. Now, to know more about his expedition and what led him to work for the Crown of Spain, let's watch this short video.
Let us first cut the lecture and answer some questions. I am Ramon B. Beleno III, and I will be answering some of the questions usually asked in the class. For the first question, for his last expedition, why was Magellan working for the Crown of Spain instead of Portugal? It is a known fact that Magellan is not really a Spanish, he's not a Spaniard, but actually a Portuguese. But the problem is that he was been working with the Portuguese fleet for quite a time, and the problem is he was not promoted to being a captain. So since he was not being promoted, he wanted to start an expedition as a captain, so he offered his services instead to the rival of Portugal, which is actually Spain. And since he offered a very nice package to the King of Spain, he was taken by the King of Spain because the King of Spain was very desperate at that time to actually get Moluccas. Moluccas is near the Philippines. It's actually present-day Indonesia. So Magellan said that he can actually go to the east by passing to the west. So if you remember the Treaty of Tordesillas, the west belongs to Spain while the east belongs to Portugal. And technically, the Philippines belongs to Portugal. But if Magellan can continue going to the west and arrive at the east, they can actually claim that the Philippines, or Moluccas at that time, is actually part of Spain. So for the next question, is it right to say that Magellan discovered the Philippines? There are actually two schools of thought in this question. Okay? The first one is on the political science perspective, and under political science, for a territory to be discovered, the territory must be stateless. Ibig sabihin, walang bansa ang may may-ari niyan. Now, if we're looking at political science, we can actually say that the Philippines is discovered. Why? Because we don't still have a Philippine state at that time. Okay? So, although we have a government through barangay, but these barangays are actually not united, and they are actually at war against each other. And we will discover that later on in this lecture. But in the historical perspective, they would say that the Philippines is not discovered because state, the concept of state is not important. What is important is the concept of civilization, where the natives civilized when the Spaniards came. So if we try to look at history, the Philippines was not discovered because we were already civilized at that time. We have our state, we have our barangay laws, we have our own governance, right? We already have our justice system. So the Philippines is relatively civilized, although we are not yet known at that time. So in that answer, we can probably say it depends on what school of thought we are trying to adhere to. Now, for the next question, how did Magellan convince the natives and the others to convert to Christianity? It's very simple. Okay? First is the concept of alliance or friendship. So remember, yung Spain, they actually have sophisticated weapons, way better than the natives. So for Datu Humabon and the others who actually made a compact with Magellan, for them, it's a good alliance with Magellan because they can actually have a big brother who can protect them from other warring tribes. So, mas maganda kasi mas malakas daw itong pwersa ni Magellan, so it could help them in their war against other barangays. The second answer would be because of the principles of Catholicism. Like for example, there is only one God. In the Catholic faith, there's only one God. Okay? But with the religion of the natives, with their paganistic religion, there are many gods. No, meron silang sun god, mountain god, sea god, okay? And they have to actually offer to these gods. Ang dami nilang offering. So, adhering to Christianity is actually more practical because there's only one God. Okay? Third is that the God of the Christians are way more merciful than the gods of the natives. Okay? So, yung ginagawa nila, offer sila ng offer sa mga gods nila kasi laging galit, no? So pag malakas yung ulan, galit yung sky god, pag may lindol, galit yung land god, pag sumabog yung vulkan, galit yung mountain god. So they have to keep on offering. But with Christianity, hindi ganon. Ang concept nila is that the God is actually merciful. So kung may kasalanan ka, you will be forgiven. And lastly is the concept of love. Okay? So Christianity is under the principle of love. No? Love your neighbor, love God as you love yourself. Okay? So at this concept, they were actually trying to convince themselves that it will actually cause peace, okay, whenever they would be converted to Christianity, because instead of going to war against other barangays, they can actually just love each other. Okay. On the next question, what was the cause of conflict between Magellan and Lapu-Lapu? So technically, Magellan and Lapu-Lapu are not in conflict. No? Wala silang away. No? In fact, hindi sila magkakilala. So bakit nag-away si Magellan and Lapu-Lapu? It's actually because of Ra'a Humabon. Okay? Ra'a Humabon is the rival of Lapu-Lapu. Okay? Humabon is in Cebu. Lapu-Lapu is in Mactan. So if you've been there, you notice that it's actually just one island, one bridge away. So what happened is that Humabon told Magellan that Lapu-Lapu does not believe in Christianity, and aside from that, does not want to actually be faithful to the King of Spain. So parang inudyok niya lang na ito medyo mayabang to. So what Magellan did was to instead attack Lapu-Lapu. But the next question is more interesting. Okay? Was it really Lapu-Lapu who killed Magellan? So this is the $1 million question. And in fact, it has been asked when you were in elementary and you were in high school. Diba? Paulit-ulit na lang yan. And this has been a topic in some of the game shows. Laging tinatanong kung si Lapu-Lapu ba talaga ang pumatay kay Magellan. Now, if you remember the objectives of readings in Philippine history, again, why do we still have Philippine history when in fact you are already in college? You have Philippine history when you were in elementary, you have Philippine history when you were in high school, and even I think some subjects of your senior high. So why still discuss this? Now, if you remember, the objective of readings in Philippine history is actually to teach you critical thinking. So would you really accept the fact that Lapu-Lapu killed Magellan? Totoo ba ito? So you have to ask. Now, let me tell you several answers that will prove that Magellan was not killed by Lapu-Lapu. Right? The first one is that if you remember, this is actually a battle. Gera to. Okay? And in a battle, hindi tutulad sa pelikula. Diba? Pag kayo nanonood ng pelikula, you will observe na yung kontrabida, yung number one na kontrabida at yung bida, okay? Pag sila nag-aaway sa gera, gigilid lahat, okay? And yung bida at yung kontrabida, sila yung mag-aaway. Walang ganon, no? Hindi yung pagbaba ni Magellan sa barko, sasabihin nila Lapu-Lapu, huwag niyong gagalawin yan, akin yan. Okay? So walang ganon. So paano natin nasabi na napatay ni Lapu-Lapu si Magellan? But let me give you some of the reasons. No? Bakit hindi? Okay? Or bakit namatay si Magellan sa Mactan? In fact, sabi nga natin, if you try to look at the picture, they have way better weaponry. No? Meron pa silang cannons at that time. No? May barko pa sila. So bakit natalo sila Magellan? So una is that Magellan was overconfident. Okay? Na alam nila na medyo ang gamit lang nila Lapu-Lapu would be bamboo spears or kung may swordman, medyo konti lang. Okay? So they were overconfident that Magellan did not actually bring all of his people, his crew. Okay? Konti lang, I think he only brought 3 ships, okay? And few of his crew members. Now, pagdating doon sa Mactan, unfortunately, it was low tide. So alam natin, pag low tide, the ships could not come near to the shore. So hindi maabot ng bala ng kanyon yung forces ni Lapu-Lapu. So Magellan and his crew members will have to go down the ship. So pagbaba nila, okay, and some stories lumabas, pagbaba nila, since if you try to look at the picture, medyo nakasuot sila ng mga metal armor, okay, medyo nahirapan sila, okay, because of the water. Some of them actually drowned, right? And of course, since hindi sila masyado makagalaw because of the heavy metal armor nila, so natalo sila doon. Okay? Pero hindi nagsasabi na si Lapu-Lapu pa rin yung pumatay kay Magellan. Second is that there are stories, no? Kasi ngayon medyo because of siguro curiosity of what happened, no? There are now PhD students who are doing dissertation on this topic, no? And I've come to know of this professor in Bicol that he actually did a dissertation on Magellan, and he went to Spain and gathered talagang primary sources, no? You know primary sources, no? Diniscuss na ng teacher niya yan. Talagang pumunta pa siya sa Spain, no? Para lang mag-gather ng primary sources kasi nga wala tayo niyan dito sa Pilipinas, no? Nandun lang natin, no? With yung mga records ni Pigafetta. So pagpunta niya doon, he discovered many things. Okay? So yung second reason, no, kung paano namatay itong si Magellan, okay, at hindi si Lapu-Lapu ang pumatay sa kanya, is that even before Magellan was able to arrive in Mactan, he was already killed. So we would ask, anong nangyari? Okay? Bakit namatay siya bago pa siya dumating ng Mactan? May dalawang theory. Number one was that he was already sick. No? May sakit siya at namatay na lang siya. But second, which is more credible, is that there was actually a mutiny on the ship of Magellan. Why? Because if you remember, Magellan is not Spanish, is actually Portuguese. Now, during their travel going to the Philippines, when they discovered the Philippines, maraming namatay doon sa mga kasamahan nila because they never thought that the Pacific Ocean was that large. So, sige sila, they were hoping na merong land, pero wala silang nakitang land hanggang sa marami sa kanilang namatay. So, maraming galit kay Magellan. Kala nila, traidor pa rin. Kala nila, he's still working under the Portuguese crown. So, pagpunta nila sa sa Mactan, they found the reason, they found the opportunity to kill Magellan. So, di pa siya nakababa ng barko, patay na siya. Okay? And the third, which is more interesting for me, medyo very interesting to, and this according dun sa nabasa ko is that it's according daw sa diary ni Pigafetta, may nagsabi na before that when they attacked, when they went to Mactan, they were attacked by sea creatures. So can you imagine that? They were attacked by sea creatures. So of course, I know habang nanonood kayo, you're already laughing. Ano ba yan? Seryoso ba yung teacher? Naniniwala ba siya na they were attacked by sea creatures? So, ang explanation is that ganito. Okay? What is a lapu-lapu? Ano ba ang lapu-lapu? So, of course, you'll answer, Sir, is that? It's a sea creature. So, yun ba yung sagot? Partly yun yung sagot. There is, may theory that lapu-lapu was not even, in fact, his real name. There were theories na yung term na lapu-lapu is actually a rank. So kung yung general, yung 5-star general lapu-lapu, so yung mga rank niyan are all sea creatures. Okay? So pwedeng yung lieutenant niya is bangus, or yung kanyang captain is tilapia, and yung private niya is bulinaw. Okay? Pwedeng ganon. Kaya when they had the war, nagkaroon silang gera, okay, they were figuratively and literally attacked by sea creatures. Okay? And yun, medyo may nasulat na ganon, and people were without understanding, medyo natatawa sila, how it happened that they were attacked by sea creatures. So yun yung medyo mga mga theories nila on how, okay, Magellan died. And of course, these theories would tell us that it's not really Lapu-Lapu. So bakit si Lapu-Lapu yung na-mention? Because it's actually the group of Lapu-Lapu. So wala naman silang ibang mabigay na pangalan. Hindi mo pwedeng silang bihin nila, yung mga taga-Mactan pumatay kay Magellan. Of course, it's still headed by Lapu-Lapu. So Lapu-Lapu, by virtue of command responsibility, is the one, yung grupo niya, was the one who killed Magellan. But not literally, Lapu-Lapu killed Magellan. So I hope yung mga ganung questions, still have a lot of questions. Ito, arrival pa lang to ng Spain, you have a lot of things to go through. Dadaan pa kayo ng American occupation, ng Japanese occupation, hanggang sa Third Republic, hanggang present president natin. I hope you have those questions. You don't just accept. I know when you were elementary and high school, pag sinabi ng teacher nyo, ganito, si Lapu-Lapu yung pumatay kay Magellan, we already accept that. But in college, we have to look at the primary sources and understand the primary sources and even think critically, just to ask these questions, totoo ba na nangyari ito? So I hope I answered some of your questions, and if you have more questions, your teachers would gladly answer them. So you have your group chat or your query button in your Moodle. So you just ask your questions with your teacher. So again, this is Ramon Bel III, and I hope that I was able to answer your questions. Thank you and good day.
And I'm back. I hope na-enjoy ninyo yung small moment ninyo with Sir Ramon Beleno. Napakadaming interesting factual information that he actually shared from this lecture. But now, dagdagan pa natin, may isa pa akong fun fact question para sa inyo. Totoo ba? Pwede ba talaga nating sabihin that it was Magellan who first circumnavigated the world? Well, in fact, he actually died in Mactan. So the answer is no. He led the first expedition that aims to circumnavigate the world, but he was not able to circumnavigate the world. So, ang tanong natin ngayon, sino? Ewan ko kung napapansin niyo, pag nanonood kayo ng mga horror movies, palaging naghihiwalay yung mga characters. Well, in fact, dapat hindi. Ganun din yung nangyari sa expedition ni Magellan. When they actually reached Mactan, they only had 3 ships left. And the only ships that could go out of it is 2. So, 2 na lang yung naiwan. And ano yung nangyari sa kanila? Yung isa, dumaan ng Pacific Ocean. And then after they went through that route, they were never to be found. Nawala na lang sila. And then the other one actually headed to the Indian Ocean. And if you remember from the Treaty of Tordesillas, East belongs to Portugal. So they were basically caught by the Portuguese and they were sent back to Spain. So that is a story of who and what expedition first circumnavigated the world. So after the Magellan expedition, Spain have discovered how rich the Philippines is in terms of resources. If you're gonna go back with the 3 Gs, as I have mentioned a while ago, one of the factors why they really wanted to fund this expedition is because of glory, yung economic aspects, yung trade. And then, nung pumunta sila ng Pilipinas, nagulat sila, nabighani sila. If you actually go to Butuan and Surigao, or if you actually see documentaries in YouTube, you will see that there are a lot of documentaries stating how rich these areas are. Well, in fact, noong unang panahon, pag pupunta ka ng Butuan, tapos dadaan ka sa ilog, lagay mo yung kamay mo sa tubig, pag angat mo, puro na yung ginto. Ganon tayo kalikas sa ginto. At hindi lang yan, even spices. During the age of exploration, they really wanted to go to Moluccas, which is now part of Indonesia, because of spices. And when they actually went here in the Philippines, and some of them were able to come back in Spain, sinabi nila, kwento nila, nasa Pilipinas, ang dami, hindi lang ginto, marami ka rin makukuha ng mga spices, katulad ng cinnamon, honey, and even pepper. So, nagka-interest talaga ang Espanya na pabalikin, mag-fund pa tayo ng maraming expeditions, papuntahin pa natin sila ng Pilipinas. But the question is, nakabalik pa ba sila ng Spain? Because of course, the route is not easy. And even though Magellan or some people of Magellan were able to come back to Spain, hindi pa nila ganun kabisado yung ruta papunta ng Pilipinas. And they also need to adhere with the Treaty of Tordesillas as well, saying that they cannot actually travel to East because that belongs to Portugal. So now we will be discussing some of the other expeditions that went here in the Philippines. Namely, we have, as you can see in your screen, Carquisano, Saavedra Sarion, and Miguel Lopez. Unahin natin si Carquisano. Kung napapansin niyo sa screen niyo, siya lang yung walang picture. Kasi hindi talaga siya yung head ng expedition na yon. It was actually the Loaiza expedition. Loaiza just said na pumunta ka ng Moluccas, and before siya nakapunta ng Moluccas, napadaan siya ng Mindanao. Medyo limited din yung information sa kanya, even if you're gonna look for it in history books. So, after that, we have Alvaro Saavedra Sarion, who headed the expedition in 1527. He set out to investigate what had happened to the 2 earlier expeditions and rescue any survivors they could find, which is the Magellan and the Loaiza expedition, kung saan doon din nabelong si Carquisano. So, mainly that is actually the goal of Saavedra Sarion. And then after that, we have another important expedition which is headed by Ruy Lopez de Villalobos. He was instructed to proceed to the Philippines specifically to, of course, gather much more spices and also to give much more or to gather information about the natives that is living in the Philippines during that time. Now, Villalobos expedition is actually very important as well. One of the captain from the Villalobos expedition is named Bernardo de la Torre. And then he was leading the ship named San Juan de Letran. Kasi yung mga ship nila noon, binibigyan nila ng pangalan. Just for, para mabigyan lang siya ng mas easier way of actually to kung saan siya belong na ship. Okay, now going back to the topic, during the time when Ruy Lopez de Villalobos is actually here in the Philippines, he instructed Bernardo de la Torre to go to Leyte. Yung Leyte noon, ang tawag natin sa kanya, Tandaya or Candaya. Nung nakarating sa Bernardo de la Torre doon, binigyan niya ng pangalan yung lugar, which is before we know as Tandaya or Candaya, ngayon Leyte na. Pinangalanan niya ng Las Filipinas in honor of, by then, Prince Philip II. So, again, it's not the whole Philippines na pinangalanan agad ng Filipinas. Yung Leyte lang talaga. So, that is, again, Ruy Lopez de Villalobos, and that is how the archipelago acquired its name. Now let's go to Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. I think you are all very familiar with Miguel Lopez de Legazpi as well. He garnered the name Adelantado because according to the Crown of Spain, to the King of Spain, he was able to establish a colony here in the Philippines na almost bloodless na wala na masyadong war compared to the other colonies that they had and compared to the other ways on how they tried to pacify the other colonies that they had. So let's know more about Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. Let's know more about the Legazpi expedition with this key 4 points. First is Urdaneta completes the western route. Now the question is, sino ba to si Urdaneta? He's actually a priest that accompanied Legazpi in his expedition. So kung manonotice ninyo sa mga readings na binibigay namin sa inyo, if you could actually read it, there will always be this priest that would accompany the expedition. So why? Bakit may pare ba talaga? If you remember from the 3 Gs, one of it is gospel. So in order for them to really spread Christianity and for order for them to conduct masses, they need a priest aboard. And also, another important role of this priest is to write. Just to have their diaries and write all their observations and lahat ng nangyayari sa expedition kung saan sumama sila. Father Urdaneta is a survivor from the Loaiza expedition, and he is also very much interested in cartography and also discovering routes, just like the other expeditions, just like Magellan, Columbus, and so on and so forth. So when he actually returned to Spain, he was very much interested to go to another expedition because according to him, he will be able to complete his western route. Well, he did. For the Legazpi expedition, he was able to do that. Now, this route will be used by the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade later on as Spain will be colonizing the Philippines for 300 years. Now, let's go back to Legazpi. Again, he was named the Governor-General. He is the first Governor-General of the Philippines and was named by the King of Spain as Adelantado de Filipinas. For he successfully established a colony here in the country. And then, number 3, La Villa del Santísimo Nombre de Jesus is the first Spanish settlement in the Philippines, which is located in Cebu. But they moved this in Intramuros, and there, they really built the center of the colony. So that is why, even up until now, our center is actually located in Luzon. Remember, if you have any questions, you may just post it in the Inquiry and Concern section in your GE 1210 online classrooms homepage or reserve it during our synchronous class. I hope you've learned a lot from this lecture and see you again in the next one.